It's a free market economy, but it's also a national security issue.
Okay.
To be an independent country, you need to be independent in food.
I tend to think of climate change as a national security issue.
I do too.
They're not going to be able to do it in time the way they're doing it. And every time,
recognize this and adapt and change policy so we can deal with it.
Let's look at ourselves right now, okay? Let's say this road we're on is the American political system. And you see past that bridge up there? We have to get past that bridge in the next minute. Except this is what we're stuck on because we can't get there. And you know this as well as I do. I know people in their 20s and 30s that will not have kids because they're like, I'm not going to subject a human being to what's coming. Do you think my children, who are 15 years younger than that, are somehow going to go, God, I always wanted my kids to grow up in Mad Max, eating lizards off the road and murdering their neighbors to get a glass of water? I mean, things are going to break down.
Wesley, the passion that you and so many others have on this is what gives me hope in democracy and hope in the future of the country. That's what it's going to take to make change happen.
I think we're living in a rigged system. And I think it's very hard to break out of that rigged system because money talks.
I drove down from San Francisco yesterday on Highway 5, and it's bumper to bumper for 300 miles on Highway 5. And you think, God, that's just a small part of it. So we know in these big urban areas like the Los Angeles Basin and metropolitan New York, we know that we live here for convenience, we live here because civilization works, but we also know it is relatively fragile. It depends on power, it depends on water, it depends on food, it depends on warehousing, it depends on security and people following the rules and obeying the laws. And it only takes small disruptions to that, whether through natural disaster, through climate change, through organized crime, or through war, through exogenous forces. And you'd see catastrophe.
It's easy to see how things can fall apart. Long tunnels and out pitch dark. Communications and telephone systems have collapsed. On motorways, cars simply pull over if they find a place with a signal. People now stand in line outside supermarkets, not to go in. They're just hoping that it will eventually open.
Era como si fuera un lugar desierto, porque no tenía cómo comunicarme ni cómo buscar ayuda. No tenían agua, no tenía luz, no había medicinas.
The combination of the weight of scientific evidence and the dynamics of the financial system suggest that in the fullness of time, climate change will threaten financial resilience and longer-term prosperity.
All the money in the world will not save us once it starts to fail. And then people will discover that you can't eat a flat-screen TV and you can't eat a German luxury car.
What are we gonna do?
It's war. And it's a much more serious war than World War II because if we lose, we're all dead. I mean, you'll already be dead, so maybe it doesn't concern you as much, but I don't want my children to starve to death.
You're writing me off really early. Please don't write me off so early.
20 more years.
Looks good, doesn't it?
It does.
It's a great part of America. It's like an American icon. My generation, it was the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
Surfing USA.
Yeah. So, you know, tourist heaven.
Yeah.
But if I were a tourist from another planet and I was like, hey, let's go visit Earth. And then my travel guide was like, well, it's populated by about 10 billion carnivorous apes, and they're armed.
My
Let's give you
goal
20 more
is to
years.
see is to see your children grown, educated, married, and I want to have great-grandchildren. That's my goal.
Okay, if you want to have great-grandchildren, what you have to do is you have to help build that environment that they're going to survive in.
I want you to see the facts as they appear to me. I'm a national security guy. That's what I've spent my life working on, trying to protect America, the Constitution, the way we live, and our futures for our children and grandchildren.
I love my dad. We're both concerned about security. We're both concerned about the future. But there's definitely a difference in the generational perspective of this. Now, I understand his generation because they grew up right after World War II, the baby boomers. They grew up in a world that was constantly improving. More rights, more money, the economy constantly expanded. They saw us go from fairly primitive industrial society to what we have today.
There have been empires that formed and collapsed. And about 200 years ago, mankind suddenly discovered how to take energy more effectively from the earth in the start of the industrial age. And it was coal, and it was England, and it was a steam engine that could use that coal, and it spread throughout the whole world. We have taken that energy and built this civilization from it. And the price that's being paid is the carbonization of the atmosphere and climate change.
Yeah, that's the finale.
You know, and you say in World War II, everybody chipped in and did their part.
Yeah.
And that was 75 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, we've been involved in so far a 19-year war. And in that 19-year war, we were told to go shopping and to buy more stuff. We were never told to save anything. We were never told to contribute to a war effort. They even cut taxes when we went to war.
That's right, twice.
Twice. With gambling, the house always wins, and it's a rigged game. It just is. Not unlike the banking system and our political system nowadays. It's all rigged. People don't have an actual choice in a lot of stuff. Yeah, people have a choice to go to Vegas. When you ran for president, I drove all over New Mexico and other places. All I could think in 2003 was that we can't actually build an economy off stripping, gambling, and crystal meth. And we've made a concerted effort to do that in this country for the last 20 years.
You know, a business caters to what people want. American society has produced enormous amounts of leisure.
They've tried to recreate the feel of the Roman Empire in the heart of Vegas. And interestingly, it's like late Roman Empire, so it's right as everything collapsed.
We have the smarts and the know-how and the conscience to know that we have to sustain and protect this earth because this is where we live. So we love civilization, but we've got to change the way we're approaching our economic endeavors.
The world is suffering through the worst financial crisis since the 1930s.
There's been a lot of damage done. They hear $700 billion package, and they immediately think the next day everything is going to be better.
You're witnessing so much wealth loss.
If you connect the financial system to the other possible shocks that are out there, you realize it's we're walking on ice.
Panic coming through the phones, on the floor, traders just trying to rush to get to the point of sale to get rid of their stock.
You know, what people built up over years and years and years has been erased.
At some point, you run a risk that something goes afoul. We were worried about Greek debt. We're worried about Italian debt.
Spanish debt,
I
Irish
mean,
debt.
and so far, it's been finessed. And you can't see what the U.S. Treasury is doing behind. We're doing a lot with the U.S. government to keep the system working, and you just don't know what the limits are.
So if you think, how can we lead the world in fixing the economy and fixing the climate, you have to make the investments now, because you can't wait till you're like Somalia. I mean, you may notice Somalia doesn't have a lot of infrastructure programs that they fund. They're not pushing the boundaries in technology. And that's not because people in Somalia are stupid. It's not just because they've lived under civil war. It's because they don't have capital. They don't have resources.
Capitalism is an economic organization, or it's a way of organizing the economy that is focused on trying to create future returns over and above of the investments that I make today. So it's all about expansion. It's all about making more in the future than we currently have.
When you borrow money, well, what happens is the banks would like to charge you interest, not only for the risk, but because they want the capital to come back with babies, not just to go and that's it, because they want to make sure that capital is increasing, and that's how you build wealth, and that's how you increase your assets.
And it's that debt that has enabled all of this to be here. It's the accelerant to economic growth.
Now, as long as a company can service that debt, it's okay. But consumer debt, if it can't be serviced, is a problem. Mortgage debt, if it can't be serviced, as we've seen, is a problem. And national debt, if it can't be serviced, can be a national security threat.
Alexa, how do we avert a financial crisis?
Here's something I found on Wikipedia. A financial crisis is any of a broad variety of situations in which some financial assets suddenly lose a large part of their nominal value.
Preparing for the future, when the future is unknown, is obviously difficult. But we are today taking steps that are clearly going to make things worse.
Finance is really making bets on an uncertain future. And you want to be careful about making too many bets, especially when there's some indication that the future might be very different from the present.
So much of our energy is caught up in the financial system that we've neglected the investment in real things that are required to take the country forward. We haven't really come to grips with this yet because the economic system, the political system just doesn't want to face it.
The economy has grown, but debts, indebtedness of households, firms, banks, governments, the debts of all these actors in the economic system have increased much more than GDP.
Really?
Yeah, so let's say I think maybe in the 1970s or so, the total debt of all these actors, households, firms, banks, government, the total debt to GDP ratio was maybe of the order 120%. And now that has increased very steadily over time to about 290%.
So if no one got paid for 3 years and continued working the whole time and didn't eat or drive cars or anything, we could pay that debt off? But does the debt matter?
Well, I mean, the debt matters to the extent that we have a system. It is called capitalism. And in that system, laws are telling us that debts have to be repaid. How much debt do we need to generate $1 of GDP? For the economy to create $1 extra of income, we are relying on $3.3 of extra debt. And income is basically wages plus profits. That is what GDP is. You can also call it differently. You can say it is value added, created by producing stuff.
And as a result of emphasizing on the GDP, we have ended up in a situation where the market is going on, there is some selling, there is some buying, but we really don't know how well people are doing.
You know, when we were kids, $1 of debt pretty much created $1 of GDP.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, it's like Keynesian economics. You put the money into social projects and it recycles back into the economy. But today, it takes more than $3 of debt to produce $1 of GDP. And
Wow.
that's all occurred in the last, like, 30 years.
Wow. So in order to create more money, you've got to create more debt.
3 times as much debt.
That's insane.
More than 3 times as much debt.
It's that access to credit and the kind of ability to take on lots and lots of debt that has been able to sustain this kind of trend in consumption.
So there is a very, very strong relationship between increases in income and increases in carbon emissions.
In the US, which is already kind of the most disproportionately high energy producing, high consuming country, per capita spending grew 42% overall from 1990 to 2008, with a 300% increase in spending on furniture, an 80% increase on clothing, and a 15 to 20% increase on vehicles, housing, and food, despite the fact that wages were pretty stagnant over that time period.
So this is the Wall Street Bull, which is a symbol of a positive market, which means more people are spending money than spent it the day before.
Our democracies basically have become dependent on the idea that there will always be more to go around, that we can expand, expand, expand. We know that there's fundamental uncertainty. We just don't know what the future will hold.
Over the course of my career, I've worked in mathematical modeling. I was a space physicist for NASA, and I was on pretty big projects. I was on the Hubble Space Telescope team as a scientist. I was on mission to Mars as a space physicist. And so I'd worked in some pretty big areas. When people say, well, how do you know that the climate models that we have now will be accurate in 30 years' time? What I can tell you is that the models that we were working on 30 years ago are actually unbelievably accurate. What's happened with the atmosphere is we're seeing this type of instability, kind of like, you know, if you had a top just standing there, it'll just fall over. And so you're seeing that type of wobbling and instability. I don't exactly know how unstable things are going to be, but to me, it's the volatility and the instability that's even more concerning than just the pure temperature rise over time. Let's say that inflation were to go over the top, stock market crashes. Let's say there are all kinds of sanctions on exports. You can't even export your tech. You know, all you're left with to survive is you and your environment.
You know, one of my goals this year was actually to get more educated on climate change. And I took the path that I was going to see both sides of the argument. What was interesting to me was I could find very little in the climate denier space. The more I read, the more I see around me, the more I get concerned.
The officials came out and said, we're going to have to release the dams. And I remember looking at my husband and looking at my daughter and the dog and the house and thinking, am I in the middle of some movie?
So I'm 5'8", and the water reached to about right there. Until it happens to you, you don't believe that this can happen in the United States of America. And all of your financial stability is gone. So if we have, God forbid, any other emergency that comes up, and believe me, that is a source of traumatic kind of panic that sets in when we go, oh, what if something happens? What if there's another emergency that arises? Then we have no funds.
Never did I ever imagine that everything that I would work so hard for would be taken from me in a matter of hours. And so I do believe that climate change is going to have a huge economic impact. And what wealth you have can be eradicated in a matter of hours.
We had a house up here on the hill that my wife wanted to get out of because it was dangerous for the fires, with the climate change, everything's getting crispy. We said, we better get to somewhere where we're not going to get burned up. So we moved to this beautiful place, and the fire didn't get us, but the debris flow after the fire wiped us out, man. We had like mud, 4 feet here. Huge rocks.
You were here, right?
Oh, we were.
How did you get out?
Rescued by helicopter, man. I said, my wife, you got a sheet? And she said, yeah. I said, what are you gonna do with the sheet? I said, I'm gonna write help out there, She said, maybe make it SOS. I said, that's a good idea. Went out there and drew SOS on the mud, and pretty soon they come, they let a guy down. And they said, we weren't sure if it was SOS or an area code. It looked like it could have been 805. And I said, well, I got to work on my S's, man. But we were lucky, we could afford to.
Well, people died. People died in this, right?
Yeah, terrible. People were washed right through our place. And we were the lucky ones. We had the money to refurbish this place. But, imagine people, struggling all over the world with this climate change.
Well, that's the way it starts. It's you read about it and it seems far away, but then something happens and bang, it's right on you and gets very personal.
That's right.
Oh my gosh. Words can't describe it. Words can't describe it.
Global systems of finance are deeply connected and based on housing finance in places like the United States. So if you get in a situation where a homeowner can't pay an insurance premium, can't hold on to their mortgage for that reason, defaults on a mortgage, goes into foreclosure, you're setting in motion the sort of early parts of the story that we know is a very familiar one from 2007 and 2008.
And we're not particularly good at preparing for difficult times way in the future when in fact we've got difficult choices right now.
When you survey people in the US and in the UK about sources of stress, it's work and money.
Alexa, how do I solve our economic problems?
Sorry, I don't know that.
We're heading off the cliff in terms of climate change. There's a real urgency on this now that cannot be denied.
I grew up in the heart of the military-industrial complex. My father became a general after I went off to college. I went to the Foreign Service School at Georgetown. Madeleine Albright was one of my advisors in college. And I thought, I know how the world works. There are people in charge, there's someone with a plan, there's someone running stuff. When my father was head of NATO and I got to go over there and visit and hear the kind of questions that senators and congressmen were coming up with, I realized, whoa, no one's running anything. And the mistake that the great majority of us make is that there are groups of people running things. Someone has a master plan. There's a cabal or a conspiracy behind it all that's running it. And it's just not the case.
Hey, Wes.
How's the conference?
Hey, good.
Good.
No, I think they really wanted to hear what's going on, and what the challenges are.
Yeah?
And that's what I gave them.
God, reading this thing about Venezuela, you see what happens when an economy collapses.
Total collapse.
I mean, was it just initially the oil prices, or?
They've tried to make it a populist democracy, you know, where now Maduro is a dictator, but, you know, supposedly people like him, but in actual fact, Cuba's in there. And I was down about 6 months ago in Colombia, and they were telling me that actually the Cubans are going up to the Venezuelan army and they're disarming them because they don't trust the Venezuelans. This is the way you take over a country. You get rid of, you know, you put your security forces in, then you build up your extra military force, and then you go to the military that might be loyal to the country and say, give us your weapons. So a lot of the Venezuelan militaries become refugees.
Oh, wow.
They were disarmed and sent out of the country, yeah. And there's millions of people that are just there. They live there, they were born there, and they're struggling to survive.
It's, I mean, we're heading in that direction already before we've even had the economic breakdown with armed groups in the streets. You had 20,000 armed people in the streets yesterday.
Well, that was just a demonstration.
Brought guns. You don't bring guns to a demonstration. Unless you're demonstrating you'd like to kill people that don't agree with you.
Venezuela can be an example of what happens when civil society breaks down because you don't have stable, transparent rule of law government and you don't invest in your infrastructure the right way. In many ways, Venezuela is a leading indicator of the challenges that will face the whole world.
Many, like Erin Burgos, feel they have no choice.
Bueno, no hay luz, no hay agua, no hay comida, no hay trabajo.
What was once one of Latin America's wealthiest countries is now its most chaotic and dangerous.
But that's what happens in these countries.
But by these countries, you mean countries that have incompetent leadership?
Countries that have that are failing to take care of their people, but that compensate for that by setting up repressive mechanisms to ensure that they stay in power.
I just worry about it happening in the United States. You have a country like Venezuela where the first thing that collapsed is their energy infrastructure. Yeah. And then now we're finding out that it's not just electrical and oil pumping, now their water infrastructure is collapsing. And this is a country that's tropical, that's filled with water.
The energy sector has not received the training or investment it needs, and the experts were kicked out. And so the energy sector, in particular the oil sector, is collapsing, and that was a major source of revenue for the country. At the same time, you have significant drought in a country that has a lot of water, which means the dams cannot produce the same electricity as they used to. So you have collapse of the electrical sector, along with the oil sector, along with civil society. And this means you also have collapsing water infrastructure, because even if you have the pipes, if you don't have electricity, you can't operate everything. So severe strain, which means food shortages, riots, lack of money. This is a major problem. The United States and Europe is rich, but if we choose to underinvest in our infrastructure and if we choose to not prepare for the future, we could suffer these kind of consequences as well.
The impact of climate change is not a straight line function. It's clearly a progression that is accelerating in magnitude very dramatically. And so any lapse at this point in responding is going to have, I think, a critical impact down the road much sooner than we would anticipate.
This is a crisis waiting to happen. It's a slow-moving crisis in front of our eyes.
So when you see in a movie, an asteroid's going to hit us in 6 months, but Mr. President, we've been working on this potential problem for 6 years. In real life, the asteroid takes everybody out. The same goes for climate change. The same goes for a whole host of issues we have, because when people see something on TV, and look, politics is a confidence game, and people look at the politician and they go, he must know what he's talking about, or she must know what she's talking about. That doesn't mean there's an actual plan with any kind of systemic machinery behind it to produce results.
As the waters start to recede, the financial costs will add up.
Are you tired of living in a home like this when you really want to be living in a home like this? Let's check it out. We've got tons of waterfront property and more coming every day. Century 22, now serving parts of California.
The sparkling drinks are just dandy.
For those of you that went to the mountain and enjoyed that 16 feet of brand new fresh powder, nice job. But as you can see, we've got a hot front coming in, so tomorrow there's gonna be 155 degrees Fahrenheit, so you might wanna break out those Speedos.
You read the big article about Peter Thiel, who's the guy who's made the big fortune off tech, has bought and built bunkers in New Zealand, right? Because their plan is we're all gonna die and then they're gonna ride it out somehow, even though they won't. But there's the belief that their money will insulate and shelter them from what's coming for climate change.
There have always been people who predicted doomsday.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard climate change likened to a world war. The difference is that we know a lot more about what's coming.
Come on down to our luxury survival condo and don't let the Armageddon get you down.
So unless you can produce thousands of years worth of water and air and food in your underground bunker, you're not gonna make it. And the most likely outcome will be that the construction workers, probably non-union, that you paid to build this bunker for you, know exactly where it is, and they have access to all the tools to dig you out of it like a truffle. The sooner people start using their money as a tool instead of a goal in life, the faster we're gonna be able to dig ourselves out of this hole. Okay, so Dad, I know you don't want to pay attention and you don't want to be filmed with miniatures because it could, you don't want to look like the guy in Dr. Strangelove or any other retired general playing with things.
That's exactly what it looks like.
Look, we need to set up something that people can understand how it works. We have like a grocer farmer, another store here, a bank, a homeowner, and then emergency services, and over here's like nature, or we'll even say foreign country or Africa or somewhere else. So, but the first thing I got to do is change how everything's set up, because we need the bank in between the country club and everybody else.
We have a huge financial system compared to what I could call the real economy, that is where people work and produce and live.
What we were talking about was trying to explain capital structures and insurance and financing and mortgages using children's toys. So we have money.
Is it gonna work?
I don't know if it's gonna work.
First thing is, the grocery store is a business and it makes money. And they deposit the money in the bank.
Okay. Boom.
Okay? John works at the grocery store and he gets paid by the grocery store, and he decides he wants to buy a house.
Okay.
He doesn't have enough money from his earnings to buy the house, but he goes to the bank and the bank said, oh, we'll give you the money to buy the house, and in return, you'll give us an IOU. We have to look at the house. Does it pass inspection?
Yeah, it passes inspection.
And can you afford it based on your monthly income?
Well,
the answer is say yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So here's a mortgage. Okay, so here's the money. And
by the way, this is just like a real bank, because in the real bank, they're not sure, can this guy pay for it? Just tell him yes. Tell him yes. Come on, let's get the money.
We typically think the bank takes deposits from us and then lends it out. The balance sheet, it creates one entry on this side, another entry on that side, has sort of claims to come back, and if it really comes back as expected, they make a return on that, and that's basically making money out of thin air.
In the old days, I would put this mortgage and I would say, this is an asset for me because you're going to pay me every month to pay this mortgage off, right?
So you're telling all your buddies you have
a better way to make money, okay? So the bank takes the IOU and the bank sells the IOU into what's called the secondary market.
Okay.
And it gets a fee for that.
And once I have this mortgage and maybe the mortgage from many other houses in the neighborhood, and ideally from other neighborhoods as well, I throw this into what we call a special purpose vehicle, which really in legal terms is typically a trust or a corporation, these asset shielding devices. And then you issue claims against these new legal shells to investors.
They package these IOUs up, so there's many of them, and they sell them to people like insurance companies or foreign banks, and they can be leveraged.
Which means I can make loans off these things,
Yes,
which
because
are
you
loans.
you have leverage here. So you can make more loans. So the system always generates cash. They can reduce their risk because they're not just buying a mortgage, they're buying a package of mortgages. In some cases, they're just buying a slice of the interest rate off a package of mortgages. And so all of these are called derivatives. And everything works as long as there's an expectation that the loan will be repaid, that John will, at the right time each month, give the bank money to pay down his share of the IOU. So the old way the banking system worked, it used to work that the banker would look you in the eye and say, "Are you creditworthy? Can I trust you?"
The banks really aren't keeping the mortgages on their books anymore. They're selling those mortgages so that they can be repackaged as other kinds of financial instruments. So they're able to sort of pass the buck, pass the risk off to the next person.
Depending on how they're rated by the rating agencies, these are reputable investment opportunities for retirement funds. Sure, yeah, pension funds, sure, put them in here.
So the investors are buying an interest in the cash flow that comes from the homeowners into the pool that we have created, but have sort of a claim against this house as well because this cash flow is backed by the mortgage against the home. So something as illiquid, as formidable as this building and the land it stands on can become a globally tradable financial asset through appropriate legal coding.
This is your loan. It travels through this system. The bank has the loan, sells it, it becomes a security. It becomes part of the balance sheet of money market mutual funds. These money market mutual funds then basically exchange your loan, your collateral, your house, in a collateralized cash deal. And the whole purpose of both the cash and the collateralized cash deal is that it allows the various actors to operate in derivative markets and make very high rates of short-term return.
Today, debt is treated like an asset that can be traded globally, right? So we made a huge jump from, let's say, the 12th century when the first assignable notes came about to treating debt as an asset that we can just trade on a global market.
At the bottom, there's tangible value. The same value is used not just one time, but 2 or 3 or 4 times in financial sector trading. It is not going to for productive investment in firms. It is also not going to finance and fund climate change mitigation and decarbonization. Money creates more money. Wealth creates more wealth. And this is a circle, and it just goes on. At the end of the day, it's our houses, which are the value of our houses, which are backing this up. The IMF has called it the shadow banking system. Shadow here doesn't mean that it is illegal. It also doesn't mean that it is necessarily shady and so on. It is just that it is shadow because there are no rules. It's hardly any rules. It's sort of almost the Wild West of the financial sector.
And the problem with the derivative market is there is no market. So it's like one-on-one swaps between bankers. It's like you and I say, hey, I know what bank you're working for, and so I've got some bonds, and I want you to insure them for me in case the interest rate changes. Would you insure these bonds for me? So how much would you charge? You tell me a price. I say, that's a good deal. I'll get a bonus for setting up the insurance. You'll get a bonus for you know, taking in the money to do the insurance.
But I work at a different bank.
It's
and
a good
I heard
deal.
you just bought those. And I figure I could also get those because I know a guy in Saudi Arabia or China that would pay 2 cents more. And I could make 50 grand off it.
You wind up so far from the underlying
The thing is,
origination, yes.
it's like the old insurance principle is how many people can insure one person's house? You know, can each person in the neighborhood put a $100,000 policy on that house and each person collect $100,000 when the $100,000 house burns down?
As Americans, we're short-sighted, we don't think long-term. And financial literacy was not this complicated 100 years ago. You had a little bit of money, and you probably didn't even have a bank account, you paid your bills, and you passed bills around.
And you kept it under the mattress.
Right, or you kept it under the mattress. That's not where mine's at.
The critical derivatives for our financial markets today are actually, or the ones that brought down the financial system in 2008 were the credit default swaps and the collateralized debt obligations. And a credit default swap is basically a kind of an insurance contract, which basically says if some assets in the markets decline in value, the insurer has to pay me a fee. And the beauty of the CDS, the credit default swap, was that you didn't have to hold the asset yourself. It's like me taking out a fire insurance on my neighbor's house. And if that house burns down, I get the premium.
The value of these financial transactions is much larger than the tangible real capital, which is basically the houses of the families, the households. The notional value of the derivatives market is $600 trillion, and that is about, let's say, 8 to 10 times as large as global GDP.
So an American city with how many trillions of dollars of real estate value right there, or at least hundreds of billions, it will no longer be there. Like, how does that work? How does that work in the banking sector? How does that work in the insurance market, the reinsurance market? What's been collateralized off that real estate?
This is not just different actors exchanging in different markets or in different legal transactions. Our financial system is such that we have huge banks, mega banks, too big to fail banks, very often operating both sides of the same market.
The big banks, they don't necessarily know how much risk their counterparty bank in some other country is willing to undertake.
Nobody really understands the legal interdependencies that are built into these contracts, and that can ultimately bring down the entire financial system.
The system is so complicated that the accountability is lost.
So the real value is actually here. These are all the transactions which are built on top of the real economy.
It's not too bad at all.
Then there's Doherty, the small town of Doherty. There's not a whole lot there today. Just it was a town that once had a general store. When I was growing up, had the church. That had a post office, but not anymore.
Agriculture in rural America has gotten a preview of the automation that's about to hit the rest of the country in the next 10 years. We're here at the town square in DeWitt, Arkansas, and if you look around, I mean, there's not a ton of bustling businesses here, but one of the busiest businesses is Department of Human Services. So when we define the real economy, let's not forget farms. 88% are still small family farms.
So this is a grain storage bin on my parents' family farm.
This is my dad's place.
He's going to be 87. Mom's 85. They've lived here since 1956. So, a lot of years.
Oh, we are a team.
Yeah.
How many times do you have to have intense rains, heat spells, freezings at the wrong point to get the crops to not come in once?
We do protect our farmers. We give them crop insurance, and the crop insurance is subsidized. We have agricultural extension services, and they pay for that, but they probably don't pay the full cost of that. It's a free market economy, but it's also a national security issue.
The federal crop insurance program was started as a response to the effects of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. Many, many areas throughout the United States were severely affected by the Dust Bowl. Many farmers lost everything. In addition to most of America being devastated by the Depression, farmers acutely suffered during that time. Many parts of the plains were just completely filled with dust. Many crops were lost due to the weather, the extreme weather, due to insects. But it's the large scale, like my dad said, the large scale events that everybody kind of worries about, like a big drought.
I think that our aquifer in some places is down to like 20%, and in a lot of places at 50%. And we're actually using more water than we have at any other time. We have our pumping plants in, and we're building on canals, and this is actually the first phase. We're trying to get water to this Indian biome, and then we're going to use that for the main water supply. In Arkansas, we're going to have a drought event every growing season. It doesn't matter if we just came, like this last flood that we had here, as soon as we came out of that flood event, we were irrigating. Because our soil is, it's not real deep. We have what they call a hard pan underneath it, pretty close to the surface.
Which helps with the rice growing.
Yes, very helpful. It just gets more expensive every day. We thought we were going to have a lot of infrastructure money maybe to come about, but it hasn't come about.
And it's federal infrastructure money that y'all?
Well, the way that was originally set up was that the federal government was going to be responsible for 65%, the state 10%, and our local district 25%. And there's a lot of people benefit from this other than just the farmers, but that's who's got to pay for it, is they're going to be the ones that's actually using the water.
And I'm assuming we'll have to do a whole bunch of stuff like that as temperature rises and rain patterns change. Then when every person we've talked to about farming and different methods of farming, whether it's till or no-till or organic or not, each piece of land is different. And each little community is different. And the ecosystem there is different. So how can a giant J.P. Morgan, how can they service a community like this?
Well, and why would they want to?
Yeah.
That's the rest of the story. I mean, that's not going to be a profit center for them to come out here and look at a man that's farming 2,000, 3,000 acres. They're looking for 20, 50,000 acre farms to where they can justify spending some time on them.
The relationships with the banks, they've gotten big too. Yeah. But it used to be these smaller banks, and they knew your dad and his dad. Hey, if you went to a farm sale and, hey, I like this tractor, and it was $20,000, you just call the bank and says, hey, I need it. And, okay, it's in your account.
60 years ago, if you made a crop, you made money. Period. If you made a crop, you paid all your bills and you could send your kids to school and you buy your groceries, you were okay. Today, you can make a crop and lose your assets.
Everybody out here, it's all family, and I mean, if you were 30 years ago when we did this, you know, a combine was $35,000, and now a combine is, you know, $400,000.
When you're looking at machines that it's by the time you have your headers and your everything to go with it being upward or close to $500,000, where else is someone else buying $500,000 equipment and barely making ends meet? It gets more challenging every year.
The cost of production and agricultural cost, or just to be a farmer, and even a small farmer, are almost cost prohibitive unless your family has been in farming for generations.
Thank God Almighty for such a good-looking crop, while others have had to struggle.
Oh, here's some fellas.
Yeah, this is who we're riding with. Y'all will be riding with.
I'll just meet you back up at the fuel tank.
All right, thanks, Zach. See you there.
Okay.
Farms are similar to owning a house. You've got to clean the gutters. You've got to, you know, sweep the sidewalk. And the same thing with a farm. You've got certain maintenances that have to be done on an annual basis to keep it in a working order.
Before automation, everything in here is handwritten. 24th.
1955.
Yep, and every day.
And that's everything that happened during that day, all the money that came in.
They made 4 loans. Like these are the loans that we made that day, and you see the size of the loans, $150, $500.
The countryside across America, not just in our rural community, but other rural communities, used to have a lot of small community banks that were very plugged into their communities and to the people that lived there and trying to help them grow their businesses and their lives. So just afraid of what the landscape holds going forward. You're just a number. You're a CUSIP number on a bond security, and here's where you mail your check now.
It's getting harder and harder for those farmers to stay in business because they cannot get the funding, because with each year them incurring loss and then no hope of the prices don't get better the next year, regardless of the type of natural disasters and things that happen. And so the farmer gets further and further behind, and we've had several farmers that are actually going out of business. They're having to sell their equipment and turn the farm over to someone else to farm.
It's actually something that I have no control over, and none of us around in England, Arkansas have any control over. And at the last one, like in 2008, when they were saying that the banks wouldn't have money to loan to your farmers, and I had several farmers that were just pulling their hair out. They were just, are you going to be able to loan me enough money to finish this crop? And I finally told him, just go home and watch Andy Griffith and quit watching CNN and Fox, and said, you know, this, as far as I know, we're going to have the money and we're going to take care of you, and that. And you need to quit watching all of those
stuff to scare you.
Yeah, that you have no control over. So, and then a couple of weeks later, he came back and said, you know, that was the best advice I've gotten so far this year.
The rainfall amounts, we don't get an inch anymore. It's either 3 inches or nothing. You know, everything is extremes.
Many of those restrictions on banks are being peeled back. So we still have trading in derivatives. It's we don't know what it is. There's hundreds of trillions of dollars maybe 600, maybe 800 trillions of dollars of derivatives on currency exchanges that can't be covered.
It's like after the 1980s, we said, oh, Gordon Gekko's a great guy. He taught us greed is good. Look what it's gotten us.
It's a cycle in America. You have to create wealth. You can't create wealth by just taking it from other people through taxes. People have to be incentivized to create wealth, and this has been the great.
But wait a minute.
This has been the great virtues of Western democracy for 300 years.
But it's also been the
as
massively
we've created this.
misunderstood is, so go back to the post-Civil War United States and the growth. The growth was made off land that people were literally killed and chased off of, and then they're like, hey man, look at all this free land. And that's how money was made.
You have to resolve that we can do better going forward. American capitalism can be pretty heartless. If you look back at the American Civil War and what happened right afterwards, we industrialized America, we went into the Gilded Age. People looked at these robber barons and said, this can't last. And we ended up in the progressive movement. This is the age of Reagan. The Reagan era was the relaxation of the administrative state. It was the sort of, you know, let big firms get bigger. It's let's make money. Let's do it all with money. Let's let charities take care of people, forget about government programs. And that's run really since Reagan was elected.
Thank you very much.
I was raised red. I was raised in a red family. I grew up in the 80s. Fell in love with Ronald Reagan. I idolized Reagan. I saw Reagan and I said, I want his job. In fact, my parents told me I mailed him a dollar bill, a defaced dollar bill with my picture on it.
The maxim is, doviai no proviai. Trust but verify.
Назначение этого...
На каждой встрече вы это повторяете.
You repeat that at every meeting.
But I wanted to be in politics. I wanted to be the first woman president of the United States. I thought it was fascinating.
We can leave our children with an unrepayable massive debt and a shattered economy, or we can leave them liberty in a land where every individual has the opportunity to be whatever God intended us to be.
You know, people like to say economics is a science, but it really follows politics. Keynes came out and looked at it. He saw the political need. That's how we understood macroeconomics. Friedman came out and looked at it, and he saw deficit spending, and he saw government control, and he saw high taxes, and he said there has to be a better way. He reinvented classical economics. They called it neoliberal economics.
Quoted Milton Friedman and said that the economy of the United States ought to be judged by the number of imports that we have and not exports. And I thought maybe this was a typo or something. No. And so I asked him, I said, are you for real?
Trickle-down economics starts in 1980. It's right around there, late 70s, we get into it. But the bottom line has two parts to it. First, fire the cops. Not the cops on Main Street, the cops on Wall Street. Turn them loose. Let those banks do whatever they want to do.
And so here we are now, 40 years into the age of Reagan. And people are looking at what it's done. Okay, it's made a lot of people really wealthy. We won the Cold War during that period, not necessarily because of that, but we won the Cold War. And America became this sort of supreme power. But for the people of America, it hasn't been so good.
I know, the real wages went down.
Real wages went down. People in this country look back at, they want to make America as great as it was in the 1950s. That's when the marginal tax rate was 91%.
I know.
Ronald Reagan my mother loved him. She watched him every Sunday night on GE Theater. At the end, he would say, at General Electric, progress is our most important product. What would Ronald Reagan say if you told him that GE spends more money on stock buybacks than it does on R&D? In 1950, stock buybacks were illegal. They were considered market manipulation. Now, investment analysts look at that company and say, well, that company's really smart. I think their stock's going to continue to grow up because they've got a really great stock buyback program. It does nothing for the economy.
The average American they're living in the GDP of 1980.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, clearly the world has changed, but the commodities you can buy are not the same commodities, but in terms of your, let's say, average, to the extent that we can measure living standards have not improved. Firms finance their investment out of their profits. That's what people think. Now, if you look at the 500 biggest US corporations, 50% of the profits are paid as dividends, 50% of the profits are used for buying back stocks. All the profits dissipate, are gone. So how do they finance their investment if they debt?
The president expressed surprise about the collapse on the markets yesterday. His still enduring popularity owes much to the economic boom that America has enjoyed under his leadership.
More people are working than ever before in history. Where our productivity is up, so is our manufacturing product up. There is no runaway inflation as there has been in the past. So, as I say, I don't think anyone should panic because all the economic indicators are solid.
But the warning signs have long been there in the closed factories in many American small towns.
I mean, there is this notion of billionaires creating employment, and that is trickle-down economics. The problem about that is that in history, it has never happened. There is no such thing as trickle-down economics. It simply doesn't exist.
It really is voodoo economics.
When you put the smartest people in the world in finance, which is what we've done for the last 25 years in this country, you can't hold back their imagination and their creativity.
The speed and scale of global economic change has overwhelmed the national systems of rules and regulations. So our first test is to agree tougher and more transparent supervision of banks, hedge funds, and what is known as the global shadow banking system.
And so when you get right down to it, I'm a licensed banker. So when the regulators come to my bank, we're a very simple little bank. They look for the SOPs, they look for due diligence on projects we've done. It's pretty easy. You go to a big bank, Wells or JP Morgan or Goldman, and you're a regulator, like, what is this? I see these emails, and I mean, they don't understand it because they're not working in it. They didn't invent it.
Sure.
It's like trying to teach people a theory of quantum gravity when they've had a high school physics course and they're inspecting Stephen Hawking or something.
The Earth is an abundant natural system that can't expand forever. The beauty of the legal code, and derivatives are a product of the legal code, is that we can expand it how far we want, right? So we always create new types of assets, we create new types of legal tricks in the end, and the two systems are not easily compatible.
If you're very rich and you gamble with your money and you lose it in Las Vegas, that is what you want, and it's your problem. But here, if they lose their money here, it is our problem.
The market can't punish for things it doesn't know anything about.
And they haven't factored any of the risks that all this could change.
Natural disaster could have major repercussions for our financial system just because they will have an effect on the asset values.
The new law allows the 12 Federal Reserve banks to issue additional currency on good assets, and thus the banks that reopen will be able to meet every legitimate call. It is sound currency because it is backed by actual good assets.
And so what happens is that there's an event, and then when the event happens, then everybody wakes up, and suddenly there's what we call in the financial system contagion, and people unload. They unload stocks, They try to get their derivatives repaid. They want their insurance policies cashed, and the market starts to unravel. When the market starts to go down, the plugs get pulled everywhere. And so what you're dealing with in climate change is not only the direct impact, but also the possibility of contagion.
Economic contagion.
Economic
Financial.
contagion. Yep.
Those views are merely forecasts, and as always, will evolve with the arrival of new information.
We actually have made it clear that we will bail out these financial actors. We will bail them. This cannot be sustained.
If it runs only because the central banks go in and buy assets, right? Recently, it was proposed that the European Central Bank should start buying shares of companies. So not only debt, but shares. So we're effectively socializing the obligation to create financial returns for the holders of capital assets. And that can't go on forever.
Even though every politician says this is the most important election in your lifetime, these forces aren't tamed or unleashed by a single election.
In the news in the last couple weeks, we've read about the coronavirus.
Yeah.
And dude, China's acting like this is like zombie apocalypse.
I'm actually kind of afraid of that coronavirus.
Yeah, no, I don't want to get on a plane.
Yeah.
Do we have a government that's competent enough and organized enough to handle that kind of response?
No, man. I mean, we can't even handle like homelessness in the city of LA. You know what I mean? Like we can't even figure out how to properly fund anything, let alone a pandemic.
Americans live under the illusion that they're incredibly different from other people. When I was in college, as everything started to melt down in the Balkans, everyone's like, these people are savages. They've been fighting each other for hundreds of years. It's like they just came down out of the trees or something. Then you're there and you realize these people live in houses that have electricity and two-car garages and refrigerators and not only children in college, but several generations that have gone through college. And they all spoke the same language. And these people killed each other. They committed genocide. 250,000 killed, rape camps, concentration camps, ethnic cleansing.
This was a plan to ethnically cleanse Kosovo and get rid of the Albanian population. Are we going to stand for that? Is France going to stand for that? I don't think so.
Like many countries, as a system starts to break down, in their case, it was the communist system, and in our case, our capitalist system is starting to break down, and people turn on each other because some leaders think everybody's upset right now and I can motivate my group to take stuff from another group.
Europe has not seen displaced people in these numbers since the Second World War.
And those are the kinds of things we have to worry about with climate change, because it happens when resources start to get tight, and everybody's a human. Everybody's prone to these things.
We've pre-cut boards that we could put over the windows in the event that there are looters and things like that to protect the house. Yeah, you saw they won, right?
We knew they won.
Well, the UN said just 2 weeks ago, 1 billion within 30 years.
Okay, 1 billion displaced people, 1 billion refugees, because they can't grow their food the way they used to because of the drought or because of floods or because of collapse of systems.
How much worse is this going to get before it gets better?
I think the general view is this is going to continue deteriorating for the time being. The next rains are a long while off.
For the world, this is a very bad thing because it's billions of people dislocated, massive economic consequences. Can you have a society that's been as successful as this one has in a material sense, and can it transform itself? You know, in the past, empires haven't been able to do that. What would these Romans say? Could they help us?
Unlikely.
Unlikely. The heritage of America is Roman. You know, the men who wrote the Constitution had studied the history of Rome. I mean, the Senate it's Roman.
And it's failing us just like the Roman Senate failed.
You know, there was a Greek philosopher who said that governments go through cycles. They go from democracy to oligopoly to dictatorships, and they collapse.
No, I'm talking about Aristotle, but...
Actually, it wasn't Aristotle, it was a different guy.
No, it was Aristotle.
No, it was maybe it was Polybius, I forget who it was.
I'll bet you cash it's Aristotle. Because we're in Vegas, I will bet you cash it's Aristotle.
You will?
Because Aristotle came up with the definitions of the 3 kinds of governments and their alter egos. So you have a democracy, which when it goes bad becomes a mobocracy. You have a monarchy, which when it goes bad becomes a tyranny. And you have an aristocracy, which when it goes bad becomes an oligopoly.
He's building on the work of a predecessor. What's the name of the predecessor? We have to find that out.
I don't know. You tell me.
We'll find it. I don't know. I have to look it up.
Wealth was attained largely through trade. Into the warehouses flowed goods from all over the empire and beyond. It was the wealthy few, rather than the many, who benefited from the riches and vast resources of the empire. This imbalance and the irresponsible behavior of public officials would become major reasons for Rome's eventual decline.
Okay, so Dad and I had this bet, and I need you to see if I'm right or he's right.
Okay.
It's about Aristotle.
Oh, boy.
I know. So, you know, I was like, well, Aristotle described, you know, the death of democracy and what happens to different forms of government as they decay.
Durante il Medioevo, soprattutto all'inizio dell'età medievale e nella fase di transizione verso il Medioevo, quindi durante la tarda antichità, la disuguaglianza sociale si fece molto più marcata di quanto non fosse stato prima di allora. I ricchi erano sempre più ricchi e i poveri sempre più poveri. Una situazione dovuta probabilmente anche al fatto che l'impero romano e il governo centrale non davano più sostegno alla popolazione povera come invece erano stati soliti fare fino ad allora. E questa è una questione che oggi ritroviamo nella società. E in particolar modo è il ceto medio che si sta impoverendo e sta sentendo sempre più gli effetti della crisi economica che stiamo attraversando dall'inizio degli anni 2000.
You see, Alessia, I know also from your studies that the collapse of the Roman Empire was mainly a huge, gigantic, enormous, humongous financial collapse. At some point, the emperors had just run out of money.
There are lots of different theories why the Roman Empire did collapse. I think what we know now is that there has been a long economic decline before the Roman Empire collapsed, before the German hordes came down and conquered Italy and conquered Rome ultimately, right? So the question is what triggered the long economic decline?
Disparity between the rich and the poor.
Honestiores and humiliores, they...
Yes, you're speaking Latin now.
Yeah, Latin.
Massive amounts of inequality may not be politically sustainable. Governments fund themselves through either debt or through taxation. In Rome, you would basically go and try to squeeze more returns out of your provinces that you occupied, or you might launch another war to get the returns to feed Rome and feed those who were running the system overall. And I think that's the common denominator, because we live in a quite different system today, right? So today it's our central banks who are doing the rescue operation.
One thing about the financial markets, one of their real power is if they can pull forward action from the future to the present. If there's credible policy. After all, most of what central banks do is effectively that.
So big trees fall hard. The market can adapt to anything as long as there's clarity, transparency, and honesty, and I don't think we're getting that.
There were a lot of things that caused the problem, but I mean, essentially, the structure of Rome held together for a good long time until finally it just ran out of economic wherewithal and leadership.
Politicians were bought. What the founders of our republic warned us about over and over, that if you get really wealthy and you lose your moral character, it's over.
Well, that's where we are.
Because we are very close to a moment in which we could start slowly going down, and if we are not very careful, we will go down faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. Woo! Roller coaster. It will be a lot of fun, maybe. You know the ancient malediction, may you live in interesting times.
So, that's how it ended last time. Except this time it won't just be barbarians, it'll be the planet itself that's on fire.
There is still active fire in that area. Monitor the conditions and know what you will do if the fire threatens.
In the smoky aftermath of the worst start to fire season anyone can remember, while some search for solutions, others want someone to blame.
Probably should take a break and let it settle in, take an intermission.
Financial ingenuity has been part of this system since the Dutch invented the limited liability company.
Isn't
and
financial.
Lloyd's of London.
But Dad, listen.
People get pretty
Everybody
good at
thought
this.
Bernie Madoff was a genius.
Yeah. Foreign investors looked at the United States and said, the United States, they're the best. That's the safest place in the world I can put my money.
I mean, we've had 5, 6 biblical-like events. We're continuing to have them. So I need to question the validity of the value of and viability of my land long term.
A little over 7 years ago, Hurricane Sandy blew through here, causing tens of billions of dollars in property damage. And since then, New York has built more, bigger, taller, and more expensive because we, the people, are on the hook for the cost of the insurance if another hurricane comes and hits New York City.
The National Flood Insurance Program is a federally run public program of insurance. It's run by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It provides flood insurance for virtually all homeowners and small businesses in the country. So this is pretty unusual, actually. Most other countries have private markets for flood insurance, but the US does not.
It's a supplementary policy that is subsidized by the government, and so all citizens are, to some extent, footing the bill for coastal property owners.
In order to build a huge condominium development in a floodplain in New York City, you of course need a lot of capital. Municipal actors in New York City are very interested in continuing to promote a version of New York City in which as much of the available land remains viable for continued economic development, because property taxes are so important there as elsewhere.
Well, the original program of the National Flood Insurance Program was supposed to stop construction in very high-risk areas where water moves with velocity, particularly floodways along the river where water moves the same rate as the river, hurricane zone areas where the storm surge comes in. The building it's almost impossible to build a really safe building against a 14-foot wall of water coming in at you in a storm surge. There's a lot of vested interests that don't care. Construction industry, for example. They'd like to build a house on a beach while the tide is out, as long as they can sell it before the tide comes back in. And once they've sold it, of course, the risk is now somebody else's.
The ways in which financial actors securitized mortgages in the run-up to the last financial crisis is still going on.
So the building contractors all want to minimize the flood program. The town wants to minimize it, want to hold down the elevations on the maps and fight every map that comes out by the National Flood Insurance Program. That causes problems, delay in implementation, maybe never implementation.
The coastal communities are on some of the most valuable land in the country, and as a consequence, people are going to fight to protect their investment positions.
I thought, okay, the city's not requiring me to have flood insurance. My realtor didn't tell me I had to have flood insurance.
You know, honestly, you don't look at the flood maps when you move into a neighborhood. You fall in love with the house. And 85% of the people in my neighborhood were not insured.
Shelter.
The United States is uniquely vulnerable to building into disaster-likely, physically vulnerable areas because of our reliance on local rule, particularly for zoning decisions. And that's part of our bedrock of the United States, state rights and local rights. And it actually has a lot of advantages, but it has a major disadvantage, which is that local governments depend on revenues that are coming from their buildings, from their residents who are building and living in their localities. And that means that all residents benefit from development.
The politics of provision are so tied up with land values in the United States that if property values go down, then the tax assessments adjust to reflect that, and you're bringing in less revenue for the tax base, which means less investment in local amenities and schools and local public transportation.
In Texas, we don't have state income tax. It's another reason why you want to live here, because it's cheap. But people are taxed on their land.
The maps that are in existence for where a 100 or 500-year flood will happen are so outdated and no longer accurate. The risk and the cost of that risk, even within the insurance industry, is not as accurate as it needs to be in order for us to appreciate what the cost of climate is.
Insurance actors have found ways to kind of take an insurance policy and securitize that and transfer it to kind of capital risk markets. So they're not really holding the bag, which means that they're willing to kind of underwrite more and more property, which means that people can kind of continue to build in risky areas.
I don't think anyone would want to come in and look at the house and come through salt water and want to buy it.
This is my nest egg.
Yeah.
This is how I'm going to help my kids and my retirement.
Right. But now, because you bought it in an area where there's rising sea level, maybe that nest egg's not so secure.
And in order to convert his nest egg to cash, he's got to be able to sell the house.
Yeah.
But now nobody will insure the next 30-year mortgage. Yeah. What happens to John?
John's lost his retirement nest egg.
Okay, so John is now literally John on the street.
The nice house they were going to buy in Florida to retire.
No, this was their house in Florida. They were going to move to Alabama.
Okay. Well, they're not moving. They may still move to Alabama. They may be living in a trailer park.
Flood involves the U.S. government in this really peculiar way. Fire is privately underwritten, so it's private insurers. And what's happening with fire risk is that some primary insurers are going out of business. You know, an event like the California wildfires, that can put an insurer out of business if they have outstanding liabilities that exceed what they can pay off.
Then we started talking, and you told me about buying a house in Sausalito.
Yeah.
So what happened?
So we called the insurance company 2 days before, 2 or 3 days before, and let them know we're going to close in a few days. And they call us back and say, hey, we can't insure that house. And we're like, what? And they're like, yeah, it's on a list of neighborhoods that we don't insure anymore. So these entire neighborhoods are going to be uninsured. And they also told us they don't know if they're going to reinsure the current owner of the house either. That's billions of dollars of houses across the state that it's going to have an insurance problem.
The insurance companies are insuring for 1 year. So as things get worse, the insurance companies are definitely not going to be able to come to the rescue of these homeowners.
These latent, hidden climate risks that might exist in different places, in different housing markets, should they burst, could take down the entire financial system.
And right now, this house is listed for $49,000. At the peak of the market, it went to about $250,000.
It's not only the owners that lose their assets, it's the financial intermediaries that lose their claims against them. It's those that bought the securitized mortgages and other assets that are linked to them, just as we have seen in the 2008 crisis.
And unless we're prepared to continue to write the same check over and over again, we need to start to scrutinize, are we hardening the utilities and the infrastructure around these homes sufficiently so they can weather these storms going forward? Or should we, in fact, not permit the investment of capital that is going to be subject to climate change conditions in a negative way? And we need to think about that.
No, that's the really scary thing, because we're not hardening any of our infrastructure. I mean, not yet.
It's very expensive.
There's guys thinking about it, but nobody's done it yet.
Well, from an oil company standpoint, most of the major assets in the United States, and actually globally, are on the coastline. From that standpoint, the facilities are as vulnerable as people's homes. So there's a lot of offshore infrastructure in the Gulf of Mexico, but that comes onshore to a lot of pipelines that are right at the coastline. And so as the coastline erodes, those pipelines become noticeable and vulnerable and have to be buried deeper or infrastructure put around it to protect it. So indeed, yeah, hardening of infrastructure, utilities and the fires that have been associated with that, or the pipelines, people are worried about how to protect those going forward.
Nature is going to be eroding the foundations of our economy.
So sometimes I'm out in a place like this, and I imagine what it would be like to come here with no money in my pocket, fleeing an economic meltdown. Because, look, we do have plenty of land. But if I had to survive out here and didn't have the money to buy something to provide me power, some way to get water out of a fairly dry land, while we love pristine nature and we like to hike in it, hunt in it, camp in it, all those things we do thanks to the technology that you bought at the store, the tent, the gun, the flashlight, the lighter. These things are made in human communities, in factories, not by people on the run, not by people out of capital. It's all about capital. So here's what happens. Capital is going to flow to where it can make the most money for the capital owner. A town like this, which was a silver mining town, is a good example of foraging theory, where if you're an animal, or, and these things translate into the human world as well, and you've got a choice between two things, one that's easy to get and one that's hard to get. If the easy thing to get is worth more, that's what you're going to go for. So that's what produces boom towns, because at one point the silver was really easy to get to and worth something. And then when the silver market crashed, well, it wasn't worth anything. So they moved on to find the next easiest thing to mine. These patterns of capital do not change over time. Capital is always going to seek the greatest return. And as soon as that return isn't paying off, It's going to pull up stakes and go somewhere else.
The way to define capital is the money that is going to be used to create something.
People are very myopic. They are just looking at what's in front of their face and the portfolio that's right there, how they're going to make money in this short term.
How you doing, Frank? So, you know, look, we look around and it's like, this is all the capital. This is all the capital in the world, headquartered right here.
Right.
And I'm assuming they all want to live, you know, past 2050. And so we got to change over. Are they beating down a trail to your door to invest?
No, they're not. We have to search for the right type of investors for our projects. And when we do find the investors for our projects, it's extremely difficult to create the value or pull out the value for our projects that the investors should recognize immediately.
If somebody can get 15% on their money doing derivatives, why would they want to get 5% on their money doing renewable?
Because they would be able to use the investment tax credit. Everybody wants a return and everybody wants to maximize their return. And the only groups that I know can maximize their return for renewable energy projects today are the wealthy individuals that have passive income.
And what do we think of as like wealthy individuals? Because I think a lot of Americans think if someone has $500,000, they're a wealthy individual.
And we're talking about people who have hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of net worth.
So minimum $100 million of net worth in order to...
I would say so. But there's not many people, maybe less than 1% of the population that has that type of investment portfolio or investments generating passive income.
Any more comments? That's pretty close, all right. Pretty close. Perfect. All right.
So when there's not investment in the market towards the technology that would help for climate solutions and renewables and clean energy, then that trickles down into the entire life stream or life cycle, you know, the whole flow of business.
Lord Keynes, who was the founder of macroeconomics, asked the question, why do people invest? And honestly, there's no answer. He called it animal spirits. I can tell you people are risk averse. And after 2008, they're even more risk averse. When I go to these business conferences and I see my friends, I ask the guy who's worth $100 million, I said, what are you working on now? He says, you know, he said, I'm pretty happy where I am. And, you know, I've got the house in Mexico and we're looking after the grandkids. And I mean, he's not investing in taking risks. He's not creating jobs for the rest of us, at least not directly. That's the animal spirits that are out there in too much of the business community right now. So the only way you can replace that is with government leadership. The Erie Canal, the Transcontinental Railroad, the Panama Canal, the space program, the interstate highway system. In no case did a group of entrepreneurs get together and say, hey, let's build the interstate highway system. No, it was a dream that Ike pushed in 1955 that came from a study done during World War II that showed that you needed these highways for national security purposes.
This is no partisan policy. No one has a monopoly on truth and on the facts that affect this country. We must work together.
The United States is highly disaggregated. We have 50 states, one nation, many counties, many regions, tens of thousands of cities, and they all have a voice in how things are done. And it's hard to get us to collaborate on certain projects unless we all align and agree it's necessary, and we feel some urgency to get it done.
If the Australian military study, the US military study, and the British military study are all correct, we've got about 30 years if we don't do anything until civilization collapses, which I'm guessing doesn't have a good rate of return.
Correct. So Wes, there are actually those who would tell you that we may be beyond the tipping point already. I don't subscribe to that, by the way. If you do subscribe to that, then it almost makes the investment in, wind and solar not pertinent.
What's the most valuable thing in the world? The most valuable thing. It's oil reserves in the ground. It's worth more than the GDP of the United States, more than the stock market, more than the stock markets of all the Western countries. It's oil in the ground. And the people that have that oil, they want it to be used. Whatever you hear about Saudi Arabia saying they're gonna, move beyond a petrol-based economy, yeah. But they're gonna move at their pace, and they need those petrodollars to get there. The societal costs right now are much greater than the economic costs of taking it out of the ground. So you have to recognize the societal impact, and you have to make the people who are producing it and selling it, and the people who are buying it, pay the full cost of using it. And that means a tax.
But we didn't even do that with security, though, because realistically, we've subsidized the oil industry for 50 years by knocking over governments, by protecting shipping lanes for it, oil lanes. So we couldn't even do it when it came to having them pay for their own extraction and security.
It's true, but one of the reasons we couldn't do it is because we didn't really have the alternative. What's the sound? We didn't really have the alternative, technically.
Engineers worked under fire to douse oil pipelines set ablaze by retreating Iraqi troops.
Animal fats and tallow could no longer supply the ever-growing need for candles and lubricants. Whale oil, which had long been the chief illuminant, was becoming scarce. Yet the demand for artificial light was increasing. In 1850, a lamp capable of efficiently burning a refined product of petroleum was invented.
Early oil production, they used steam power for the drilling, for the riggings, and different pieces of equipment, and that steam power probably was produced by burning wood or coal. So you'd use wood or coal to get oil. Today we use electricity to get oil, or we use gas to get oil. So we use one form of energy to get another, and that's one of the interconnected aspects of energy that's kind of surprising for people, is how interdependent it is. We don't have an economy that runs on one form of energy. We have an economy that runs on many forms.
Part of this equation, certainly in the short term to this time period you're worried about, is modulating consumption and adjusting cultural behavior. But people aren't talking about that. No one wants to blame anybody. If you want to blame industry, well, industry exists because people buy their things or use their things. So they're the ultimate consumers. Are we going to carbon tax them? Are we going to punish them? Or maybe part of the equation is we all accept responsibility and we get a cultural change to take place here to go back to where we were 20 or 30 or 40 years ago.
You might, but that's hard.
The vast majority of our individual impact comes from housing, transport, and food. These are kind of big structural issues that can't really be addressed adequately by changing the brand of paper towels you buy.
We live in an energy consumption society. And the way to look at things, we have to be aware that nothing comes for free. You have to be aware that everything costs energy, whatever you do.
This is not what public space looks like in the US.
No.
But I notice here in the Netherlands, everybody's riding bikes everywhere.
They are, yeah.
And that doesn't strangely require gasoline.
Nope.
question is, can we replace fossil fuels with renewable energy? And this is a very tricky question. It raises enormous debates, and people get angry when you ask them this question, because it is not clear what you mean. If you mean that you can satisfy people's greed with renewable energy, then the answer is no. If you mean renewable energy could produce a sufficient amount of energy in order to survive, and the answer is yes.
We are in an energy efficient home now that we've rebuilt, that our household use alone is twice the size of the average American. That woke me up. I can't count the number of trips that I've taken around the world for business, but that 2 international trips was equal to 1 year of utility energy in my home. And that really had me thinking about travel. It had me thinking about what I eat.
Another surprise for many people is how much energy we use in the food system.
And complete dinners.
In the United States, we use 100 quadrillion BTU of energy a year. A BTU is a British thermal unit. 1 BTU is about the energy content of a kitchen match. So in the United States, we use 100 billion million kitchen matches of energy per year. 10 quadrillion BTU is for the food system. One of those quads is in the food itself. Food is a form of energy. We're ingesting 1 quad of food energy into our bodies for 330 million Americans every year. The other 9 quads is for the rest of the food system. This is in the agrochemicals, the fertilizers and pesticides, diesel for tractors, the energy for refrigeration, the energy for drying crops at silos, warehouses, transportation, plus the energy to cook at our homes.
Pies are done.
3 or 4 quads of that is just for the cold chain. That's the refrigeration system, refrigerated trucks, refrigerated warehouses, and refrigerators and freezers at our homes and businesses. The energy embedded in the cold chain of the food system in the United States is more energy than entire countries like Switzerland and Sweden consume in a year combined. The energy embedded in the edible food we throw away is also enough to power entire countries elsewhere. Sadly, we throw away like 1/4 to half of our edible food.
Okay, so Michael, here we are. We're surrounded by water.
Yeah.
And what's the relationship between water and energy?
The water-energy relationship is twofold. One is we use a lot of water for energy. We use water to cool power plants. We use water to irrigate biofuels. We use water for oil and gas production. We use water to make steam at refineries. In fact, if you look all up and down the energy supply chain, water is at every step.
Our well is dry.
Dead.
Yeah, it's dead.
This is where the water, that would be the full mark.
It's not a fantasy apocalypse movie landscape. It's now, and it's real.
So the grid might be strained if you don't have water available for cooling, at least the way we have most power plants today, where they use heat, they then need water for cooling. Modern forms of like solar panels and wind turbines don't need water cooling.
The average life for PV panels is what, 20 years?
20, 25 years, yeah.
20, 25 years.
Maybe,
so if
maybe 30 years, yeah.
So the people say, well, it takes 7 years of energy to produce this PV panel, but then that means you're getting 18 years of energy free, so you've cut down.
Even then you get 18 years energy for free, yeah. Yeah.
So John Q. Public, I'm like, hey man, I want to put some money into your solar farm.
No, not until the government gets involved with things, puts us into a pari passu position with fossil fuels.
I've got a lot of friends who are in the renewable business, and there's a really big problem in terms of, you've got the power purchase agreement, you've got all the permitting done, you've even got interconnect agreements, except what's happening is grid companies are delaying and not letting them on the grid. What's going on with that?
I think one of the challenges we have is who has access to the infrastructure, and democratizing the infrastructure is a way to open it up so that more solutions can be brought forward. This is something we did with telecommunications in the 80s with AT&T. AT&T had built out all the wires and poles, and they were required to open up their infrastructure for other companies. And that's why we have so many phone companies and long distance companies now that we didn't have before. The same thing could happen with democratizing the electrical infrastructure. more solutions would be plugged in, more wind and solar, and we have more technologies along the way. And this is where long-range planning, stable governments really matter.
Kind of what I'm hearing is it's not a technology problem.
No, not a technology
It's not
problem.
an engineering problem.
No.
It's a financial engineering problem.
Energy poverty, lack of food, income inequality. So it's up to us now to form the policy that is going to help bridge this gap.
In 1941, when the United States went to war, people saved tin cans and aluminum and gave up, women gave up buying nylon stockings, and everything was done for the war effort. But the war was there, was right in front of us, and young men were being drafted and sent overseas, and casualties were coming home, and this is different. It requires the same type of reorganization or commitment.
But why didn't they call on me? I could have done something.
That was then, and this is now. Check out our new lot, the OK Solutions lot, with millions of new solutions and more coming every single day. Looking for something that's easy and in your price range? Check out our pre-owned solutions, like changing a light bulb or walking to work. Or our mid-size selections, like regenerative agriculture or a price on carbon. Or you'll love a variety of brand new solutions with that brand new solution smell, like deleveraging climate risk from the derivatives market, or the million-mile battery, which is coming soon. Just listen to one of our satisfied customers.
Michael, you are now in charge of the United States energy policy, and you have free reign. How would we make the transition?
For national security reasons, and for economic reasons, and for environmental reasons, there are many reasons to do this, we need to harden, improve, and expand our grid, maybe even using the interstate highways. We already have the rights of way, and put lines above ground or below ground, create a national network, and then it will span and reach to the sunny, windy areas, and already connects to the urban areas. And once we have the network, we can plug in whatever we want, build the infrastructure first, then the energy will follow. But we have to put a price on pollution. We'll take the money from the price on pollution to pay to clean up the trash. So let's take the United States, 6 billion tons of CO2 a year put in the atmosphere. And let's say we're willing to pay, I don't know, $30 a ton to remove it. That works out to, if I'm doing my math correctly, $180 billion a year. Sounds like a lot of money. That's less than what we spend on just dealing with trash from cities. Why not spend another couple $100 billion cleaning up the waste in the atmosphere? Let's take the CO2 and put it into the soil. Like, let's pay farmers to take CO2 out of the atmosphere into the soil. We need to get more of that national security mindset.
If you have a built-to-last strategy, then you do want to look at what's happening in these longer horizons, and it's absolutely critical.
It's going to take all forms of energy and all people to move us through this transition.
Otherwise, I don't think we actually stand a chance.
I'm trying to get rid of this car, but it's like quitting smoking, you know, it's not easy. You are so used to certain things that it is very difficult. The Romans had done a lot of bad things to the ecosystem, but they had not destroyed it as we could do.
FEMA estimates for every dollar spent on hazard mitigation, you save $4 in disaster recovery costs. So we're already spending the money. There's the sense that it's perhaps too expensive to prepare for climate change, but we are already spending the money. We're spending it after every disaster hits.
When I was growing up, there was the draft. So everybody thought they had an obligation to the country. If you went to a land-grant college, you were drafted. Now it's different. The trust in government's gone. The obligation to government is gone. If we could take some of that spirit of patriotism and service and rebuild it into doing something for the environment.
This entire thing is built out of carbon that comes out of the atmosphere.
We need 100,000 young people to give up part of their summer and form up and really work this. We could control these pine beetles that are destroying the forest. We could plant new trees, but it should be done not only for pay as a guaranteed job, but it should also be done for every citizen's obligation to take care of the land. That's what I'd like to see.
Sounds like you're trying to inspire a whole generation of people to
well, it sounds like something that old guys would say. And,
Wrigley.
Whoa.
Wrigley baby. Can you smile for it? That's a good noise. It's made me want to be more of a fighter for her sake. The transformation is potentially exciting because we can think not only about losing things that we have always wanted, but also letting go of things that we perhaps don't benefit from. We can lose in order to transform into something else. It's not as kind of confident that things will be okay, but it finds possibility in the ways that things will have to change in kind of really dramatic ways.
La storia ci insegna che ci sono tanti tipi di civiltà, come anche tanti tipi di economia, di scambi economici. Quindi effettivamente quella medievale fu un'economia semplicemente diversa. È vero che si adattò alla scarsità di risorse, ma comunque significò anche un nuovo modo di pensare e di rapportarsi all'esistenza.
And so we are looking at diversifying the types of crops that we are wanting to plant and also work with conservation type programs to help preserve species and habitat and let nature take its course and bring back species that we need and that the crops actually need to be productive.
We don't want a hurricane or a tropical storm, or they're already geared up, the crops are turning, they want to go ahead and get finished. People want to know where their food came from. Well, at some point, maybe people will want to know where their banker lives and who he is, and do I have a relationship with him to, when I need some money to fix something, I can maybe find somebody to help me.
I mean, it's not a matter of the government telling banks what to do or telling us what we can do. No, I mean, there's still lots of possibilities. We should have smaller banks, basically split them up and not make them too big to fail. If they make mistakes, they should fail without causing a total systems crisis. And probably what also needs to be done is introduce rules which make it impossible for the financial sector to create within the financial sector itself so much additional debt.
We have to somehow correct this market imperfection.
If you want to hedge, have a derivative. If you want to hedge your risk, fine, but you must have exposure to the underlying asset.
I remember I was watching on TV after a major flood down in Florida, and they were interviewing this guy, and he said, my father rebuilt twice, my grandfather rebuilt twice, and he says, and I'm going to rebuild again. And the reporter turned to the camera and said, that's the American way. Well, I thought the reporter should say, that's stupid. You can't keep doing it over and over again. That's the definition of insanity.
So it's basically trust in the monetary management and trust in the future productivity of a country that gives us trust in the currency, not the idea that there are some gold barons hidden in the Federal Reserve.
And so there is a point of resistance at which, governments aren't going to be have access to capital to address the problem.
The fear is if we cannot bail out the system anymore, it will come crashing down with huge side effects. The hope, and that sounds a little cynical, but I think the hope is that we probably can reorder our system only after a crash. I think human history suggests that we are unable to make really fundamental change in the way we live and the way we organize ourselves without such a crash. Nobody wants it, and I'm the last person who wants it. If I think back to the 1930s, and I'm German, right? And you think about what the repercussions of a major crisis can be. We just don't know how we will get out on the other end of the tunnel. I think without this crisis, I just don't see enough political leverage to fundamentally alter the way we organize our financial system.
when climate change happens, there will be real problems, and there will be real, as you said, there will be real scarcities, and there will be real migrants coming, and there will be
and that's what and then we'll really be broke, because it'll be after you've had that collapse of the inverted pyramid, and then it's like asking Somalia to fight climate change.
So your criticism would be that we're not facing reality and not adapting to it.
That's correct.
My answer to that is I still have faith in democracy. I believe we can do it as a people. I believe we can do it as a society. And I believe we can take the institutions of the United States that have served this country very well for over 200 years and move into the 21st century and still help lead mankind forward. It's an article of faith, but it's the faith that motivates action. We have almost all the tools and all the financial resources and all the institutions that could solve this problem. It's the kind of challenge that could bring mankind together in a way we've never been brought together before.
I wish there was more conversation, you know, more guys on the opposite side talking together, because everybody, as we feel, there are people feeling opposite from us that are just as righteous and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But we ought to get together to see.
But the thing is, if you get together with people like this, what you find is the disagreements are pretty narrow. Actually.
Yes, that's what I mean.
People are mostly agreed on like 95%.
Yeah.
But there are forces in the culture that want to sharpen and popularize those disagreements.
Yeah.
It's a human nature issue, okay? So what sells? Tell me, what sells? What do you pay attention to when it's happening around you?
You've got to find people
Conflict. Conflict.
It's true.
Conflict.
It's true.
That's it.
To create that kind of dialogue between a father and a son, that love thing, you know, I mean, this is my kid, you know, you guys must have some wild conversations, man.
That's what gets me. No, I totally disagree with that.
And capitalism.
No, I disagree with that.